morning. We're going to finish up the blue skies here and then go on to sunsets in the next video. I've got a lot of different choices here. I have rotated my picture here so that I can paint on these two and have you in the correct area of the screen. Let's see if we can fold one of these over. All right, so I've got two more sky pictures that I will send to you, and we can work on those. This is again for our beginner CVU class, because they have barely had a chance to start painting. And so we're gonna, what I like to do is go over blue skies and work with the blues first, even though we've done a few other projects as well. But this is where I really wanna start kind of showing you how watercolor works in doing landscapes and that kind of thing. So we're gonna start with sketching up some more fluffy clouds here. And yeah, and let's go. It's a gorgeous sunny day out. It is, well, gee, who knows what day it is, right? Let's not even go there. Okay, let's work on this guy first. We've got some very wispy clouds with a few white cumulo nimbus in there. And this is a sky that's going to work well if we paint the, if we wet the paper first. All right, so I'm coming in here with my biggest brush, and I'm going to wet the paper really quickly. And what we're trying to do is get an even amount of water over the entire paper. You can lift it up and see if you've missed any bits, right? And what we don't want is, we don't want it dripping either. So I'm gonna grab a paper towel here and just take a little off take that puddle off the top, all right? So what's gonna happen now is, as we've put the water down, it is at this very moment starting to evaporate and dry, right? And when you paint wet on wet, the amount of water that is on the paper makes a huge difference. And bear in mind, it is always changing, right? Because the water is always evaporating. Okay, so I've got a brush full of cerulean here. And if you see, if I put it down, it has a tendency to kind of go all over the place and bloom. I'm still going to use a round brush for this one, but I think what I want to do is also switch brushes in the next couple of sunsets. We'll see, and maybe try some flat brushes and see what they do. Okay, so this allows me to put down a very wet background. And what I'm going to do is sort of leave a few little white areas. I have to leave them pretty large because the water is still moving, right? We're going to grab here's another blue here, a good vertiture for light blue down here. Now don't worry if you don't have it, it's not a problem. Use whatever you have, right? Now I've got some little clouds that are sort of skipping around. I'm gonna take all the paint and water off my brush, and I can come in and oops, and actually remove some paint if I want, right? If I want to make those wispy clouds, this is a really nice way to do it. Just grab a brush and take some of the paint off to create some clouds. Right. I've also told you can use a paper towel. Now this is, if the paper towel is dry, you'll take up a lot of water. If the paper towel is wet, it'll take up a little bit less, and sometimes I find that works even a little better. All right, so we're going to take some of these make some little clouds. I like to turn my hand as I'm doing this, right? Kind of sort of creating a faux finish almost. You don't want the same exact shape, you know, all over your picture. I kind of just hold this paper towel in my hand all the time. So I have it here. All right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna just move a little bit of this around. We know, right, from what we've talked about, that watercolor dries a lot lighter, especially if you've wet the paper, right? You've just added so much more water to the picture that it really does kind of disperse the color a lot, and it'll end up drying a lot lighter. So you want to keep that in mind, right? You want to put enough color on the paper that when it dries, you are happy with it, right? It doesn't just totally disappear here. Okay, so I'm using a few different blues. Got some cerulean. Now I've just added some, I've mixed up some more paint here. Because my paper is evaporating, I'm taking, again, the water out of the end of the brush. So I have just my paint and water at the tip of the brush, and that will allow me to put more color down without creating a huge bloom, or, you know, big bloom of water that's gonna create more like dispersion of color. Let me show you what a bloom will do, right? So I've wet my paper here. I've got a wet brush, and if I drop a lot of water on this, the water is going to push my paint out of the way and create something that's going to dry unevenly. It's called a bloom, and often people do them by accident, but you can also do them on purpose. And if you I won't tell if it happens by accident and you say that you did it on purpose, okay? Because that's the way we roll here. What happens in watercolor studio stays in watercolor studio, right? So just tell somebody you plan to do it that way. All right. So now I've got some parts of the paper that are very dry, almost dry, and other parts of the paper that are still shiny, which means I can introduce paint, but I still have to be very careful about how much water I'm introducing, right? So I can, because we're on good paper, we're using Arches 140-pound paper. We can, this paper is happy to be wet. It works very well while it's wet. It doesn't, let's see, it doesn't crumble. It doesn't, you know, watercolor paper is specifically made to retain and be solidified even while it's still wet, right? So it's made of, the good stuff is made of rag cotton, and you know, is very durable. Our Arches paper we really love, which is why we use it with all of the classes, right? The beginners and everybody gets the same good paper, because it's very hard to learn how to paint watercolor with not great paper, okay? It just, not great paper doesn't let you play with it, doesn't let you fuss, even though I keep telling you not to fuss, okay? All right, but what it does allow you to do is sort of go back in, add a little bit more color, right? This is still slightly wet, so every time I put something down here, I'm not going to get a hard edge. That's the key. Yeah, this is looking kind of nice. We can also keep getting some of those wispy clouds. Another key for this is to sort of wait a little bit. Right, we're going to tell you, I'm going to give you all the techniques, and then you get to try them all and see. So I've got a wet paper towel here. I'm kind of flattening it out sort of and making a little curve. And I'm trying to create those really pretty cirrus clouds. I think they're stratus clouds. There we go. Right, so that takes off a bit. So let's come back in here so we can sharpen up that white cloud here in the middle. The nice thing about working wet on wet is you do eventually have to stop. You have to stop because the paper does get a little too saturated with water. It starts to buckle, and you know, you need to give it a rest. All right, give your paper a rest. Let's see. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of purpley pink down here. It's a little darker than I wanted, but we'll add a little bit of water and dilute it a bit. Right? So what I'm trying to do is just push this water around a little bit. A little more, a little darker here. I'm trying to have some of those wispier clouds show up by painting the negative, just like we did for the last bit of clouds. We're going to paint the negative. We're painting that gorgeous sky in. All right. Come in here, just add a tiny bit more. You know, and again, you can paint and stop at any time, right? This is your sky. You do whatever you want. I sometimes like to spend time because I notice things. You know, the longer I paint, the more I notice what's going on in my picture here. So I like to introduce, you know, as long as my paper is still wet, I can add a tiny bit more color here. And I can also take it out if I don't like it. All right. Okay. Let's see. Well, maybe we leave that. Let's see, got a little something there. I should be leaving it. I do like this vertiture down here at the bottom. Okay. I don't know how things are with whether ordering paints online is an essential business or not, but you know, use what you've got. Don't feel like you have to have every color in the universe in order to paint. It's okay. Most beginner classes start with only a few colors, so which is great because then you really learn to know what those colors do. Good thing to become familiar. All right, this came out nicely. Let's try and get another little fluffy cloud up here. I'm adding a little bit of water. You see, and that pushes my blue out of the way. Now, what I'm also trying to do, in order to have the bloom not just go everywhere, is I'm drying my brush, and now that the bloom's been created, I'm taking the water back off. That way, I can in my mind control the bloom there. Right? I think I'm in control of it that way. Okay, let's take. There's like one more little wispy guy out this way. So let's see if we can get him going. This is nice. Right here's my wet section down here, and I've got this side of the paper is much drier, so I'm creating an edge here with the water. Right? I didn't do it. The water dried in this way, so I've got a buckle slightly. The water is pooling over on the bottom side, and it's pooling over on the top side. I can leave that. In skies, it's so easy to just leave the blooms because they create cloud banks, and it's not an issue at all. It makes for interest. If you want to get rid of it, right, let's try. Let's see what we can do, right? Lots of times people are very upset with the bloom that's happening. What you want to do is not touch the bloom. The bloom is too wet, so you want to work from the dry side. So I've got a little bit of water on my brush, and what I'm doing is I'm going to come in and I'm going to hit the hard edge with a little more water. And I'm just going to pull it along so that it extends into the drier area of the paper, okay? No, so that's all I did, was just very gingerly hit the edge of that. So we'll let that dry, we'll see what that does. But that will eliminate a super hard edge. It might just create the super hard edge a little further up the paper here. We'll see what happens. Again, we won't know until it dries, right? That's the great thing about watercolor. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. Okay. So let's see. Let's go try and get a couple more little wispy white guys. Wait. Wispy white guys. How about wispy white clouds? There's lots of wispy white guys up here in Vermont. We have very elderly population up here. Lots of wispy white guys. Okay. Oops. I think I'm going to leave that. Okay. Got a few little blooms here, but they're looking cloud-like, so not a problem. Yep. Okay, we're back. We're back, and we're going to do the last picture on this piece of paper here. We're still working with the blue clouds, blue sky, because introducing sunset colors is kind of a different process. So I want to make sure we've had a lot of practice doing clouds, clouds during the entire day, not just at sunset. So we'll get to those in a minute, or in the next lesson, is what I'm trying to say. All right. So I'm looking at my picture. There's a lot that I could do wet. These clouds are actually quite sharp and defined, which means I need a hard edge. Let's show you a few ways of doing this. I'm gonna grab some blue, cerulean, light blue, sky blue, and one of my favorite things to do is to kind of outline the clouds with a very wet bead of paint. Right? So I'm gonna hold it straight up and almost draw an outline around this little cloud that I've got here. It's a very wet bead of paint, and we'll do a few more in the middle here. And you can see how wet this is, right? So as I go around, I'm gonna continue to make a very wet line of paint all around the clouds that I want to have sharp edges on. Right, so let's see, we're gonna follow this around a little bit. Grab a little more paint. You always need to go back when your brush is starting to not leave as much paint as it did at the beginning. That means you need to go back and grab some more paint from your palette. Right, you want they call the term, there's a technical term for a brush that's too dry. It's called a thirsty brush. A thirsty brush means it needs water. All right. Because I've added so much paint to this line around my cloud, all I have to do is touch it with a little bit of water and it will start to flow. Okay. In fact, I can just use the paint that I've already got on the paper now and bring that around. All right, it's a little lighter up on this section of the sky. So even though it's taken me all this time to get over to this little line here, you can see that it is fairly wet. Now, if things are starting to dry where you started your picture, go and grab a tiny bit more paint and water and add it to any section that's starting to dry a little too fast. And that allows you a a little more leeway, time to get all the way around these clouds without having a hard edge on them. That's what we're going for. We don't want to have a little outline of paint that's dried on this picture here. We're trying to go, we want the clouds to be sharp, but we also want the background to be wet. So that allows you to create a nice wet background with the paint that you've already put on the paper here. Right? So we're gonna pull this up. You just kind of, I'm sort of working in like little, it's like a little C shape. Sort of make the cloud this sort of C-shaped paint stroke. All right, we've got, oh my gosh, I guess that's the sun right there. So if we want, we can grab a little paper towel and come over here and sort of take the white paint, or take all the paint off right in that section and leave it. We'll let it move a little bit. But, I can now grab a little more wispy, more paint down here and kind of, again, make a sort of wispy look. It's a little darker on this section at the bottom here. I'm trying to make sure that that hasn't dried too fast. All right. You know, make sure you're working all the way across your picture, right? You don't want your sky to stop 2/3 of the way across. You work, paint right over the tape edge, right? So that your picture continues all the way over, all the way to the edge of your paper. All right, let's add a little, we want a darker blue up at the top there. So I'm grabbing a little ultramarine, and you can see this is still wet. So I'm gonna pull this and put this in. You can tell my paper is still wet, right? I've got lots of nice, it's moving very nicely. I'm gonna grab a little manganese and cerulean and sort of add that to this, and then let the paper move the paint around. Here's a little cerulean. Nope, sorry, ultramarine. I'm also noticing, why don't we try a little Prussian in this one too? Because that sky up there is quite clear. Goes all the way up to the heavens, nice and dark. Right, so here's a little bit more on this other side of the cloud there. I like using a round brush on clouds because I feel like I can get a lot of interesting shapes sort of by twisting things and twisting the tip of my brush around. I also accidentally leave a lot of little white spots, which is very nice to have tiny little clouds. I plan on doing. Okay, so let's see how that dries. The nice thing about watching me work here is you can see that I'm working on a fairly small picture here, but it's taking me a good 20 minutes to finish it. So I don't. There are ways where you can paint and do things very quickly. I really like taking my time. It's the whole point of this is painting and enjoying it. So there's no reason to rush everything. If your paper is wet, then you don't have to rush. Let's see, we've still got the white area here. I can try and keep that. I'm only going to get the white of the paper is the whitest I will ever be able to get. We can add a few more wispy clouds here again. All right, that's my wet brush, creating a few little blooms. And we'll watch them, we'll see what they do. The key for trying to control blooms is to actually watch what they're doing. You can't just paint a bloom and walk away because you never know what's going to happen. So the good thing is to keep looking at them, see what they're doing. If they're moving in a direction you don't want or don't like, you have to tweak them a little bit. Pull some of the paint off, or some of the water off, or add a little more water, that kind of thing. Okay, but this is definitely the way to create some soft wispy clouds. All right, so we've got this. It's very dark right here. It doesn't quite need to be. It's sort of pooling up right in that one little spot. So I just grabbed this, right? A dry brush just took that paint right off. And one of the things I can do is sort of add that back into the center of these dark clouds. Right? And I'm gonna hit the blue that's a little wet. So now this is the tricky part, because I've got to leave the white edge around the outside of the cloud in order to show that there's some sun shining. Right? Let's grab a little more Prussian right into the middle of that. Right. There we go. It's pretty dark. So it's almost as dark in the cloud as it is in the tip of the outer edge of the sky. But I'm still going to pull this down. Even the bottom of this cloud has a little bit of a white edge. That's why we're going slow. I really enjoy looking at something and trying to paint it. It's kind of a meditation, really. Add a little bit more in here. Yeah, we can make the sky, the clouds, very interesting by putting in a few different colors into the center of the clouds here while they're drying. This is a little bit of light purple. And I'm just moving it around so nothing is too solid, is in place too much. All right. Okay, let's watch how that goes. I do still need the cloud, the sky, to be a little darker around the outside of the cloud. So let's see here. We've got, I'm going to put in something quite dark. Because it's wet, I'm not going to get a line. Again, sort of putting it in. I'm trying a few different ways of putting the blue in, introducing this darker blue, so that I'm trying to control where it goes a little bit. You know, as the paint has come out of my brush, I now have a lot less paint on my brush, but that allows me to move over into lighter areas and still kind of create a little bit of dark in that section. Okay, let's add here's a little bit of Prussian. I'm gonna, Payne's Gray. I'm gonna take the water out because I want to create a little bit of a cloud shadow in here. Now, that might be too much, so we're gonna move it around. This is a drier brush. You can see it's almost soaking up the Payne's Gray. All right. All right, so here's one cloud that was done while the paint was wet and while I was trying to be very careful about not losing my edge. I'm going to come in and use a little bit of a wet paper towel. Try and see if I get some mid-range tones. I'm also going to leave it. Now, I think what I really want, you know, it's always nice to try, right? So we've got a cloud here. There's no reason that we can't paint the insides of these clouds after the sky has dried. So to make things a little simpler, we'll do that. Here's a little bloom created here, a little hard edge. You know what? And I think that's okay. I don't mind that at all. We're still going to keep this side whiter because we've technically got the sun shining right in there. I think we're going to leave this one for the moment. Yeah, and let's see how it dries. There's a little bit of a bloom headed in this this direction. I can watch it, right? This is the day we want you to sit here and watch the paint dry. So now I have just introduced a whole lot of new water in here. Brand new sopping wet water, which is going to create a lot more blooms down at the bottom. And okay, so now I need to spend my time watching these blooms dry and making sure that my edges are not too hard. I'm just gonna very gently move things around while it's wet. And you know, I like the lines that are being created, but I want to, if I walk away, the lines are going to take over, the edges are going to take over, and I might not be happy with what I end up with, unless I'm here seeing it happen as it goes. Let's try and get one more cloud in here, right? Because this was so wet, I can add an extra cloud by just taking off the paint. Well, once the paper is really wet, sometimes you can, almost get back to white with a paper towel. Let's try that a few more times. I'm gonna go a few more in here. And your clouds will look different depending on what shape you've got your paper towel in. Not so bad. Okay, now she might leave it. Let's see. All right, still a few more blooms here. Maybe we try with a little dry brush, pulling a few things off, right, as they dry. I can still see the buckling, and I'm using a very dry brush to kind of pull some of the extra water off that is creating some lines on my paper. Okay. So, if you want to control the bloom, you've got to control it the whole way, right? You've got to sit there and watch it dry and basically use your paintbrush as a kind of a Q-tip that's going to soak up any extra water that's creating a line. And if you've got too many lines and you're not happy with it, you put in some more lines, all right? Make it look like you planned it. There we go. Let's get this one okay off here. Oop, no, not what we wanted to do. All right, see, I created some clouds around this, but what I really wanted to do was get rid of this little darker blue right here. All right, so now I am making my own new bloom. And very carefully just pulling a tiny bit of water off the paper here. Kind of happens in very small increments. Okay. You still have to watch that. This guy over here, this section of the sky, is still a little shiny, but I've also got it, it's also buckling. So this would be the wrong time to try and introduce anything into this section of the sky, because the water looks like it's drying evenly. If I add anything to it, I'm gonna have a real big bloom. So we're just gonna let that dry. It has to get flat again, right? It's very important for all of the water to evaporate off of your paper before you start to paint another layer. And we can do more layers, right? It's called glazing. So we can add to the next section. Next dimension of clouds. Sometimes you don't need to. Right? Here's our third picture here. I'm pretty happy with how this came out. I don't feel like I really need to go back in and add a lot more. If we get it done in one shot, then that's great. And there are a million ways to paint skies. This is kind of just my way, all right? Okay, so I'll come back and we'll, what I'll do is I'll send these out to you guys. Well, I guess we got a little bit more of this cloud to finish up, right? And then we'll go on to some sunsets. So thanks. Have a good day.